It was a bright Tuesday afternoon in the town of Riverdale, the kind of perfect spring day that made everyone feel a little more alive. The parking lot at Westview Mall buzzed with activity as shoppers came and went, loading bags into cars and searching for empty spaces. Among the sea of vehicles circling for parking, a shiny white Range Rover stood out, its polished exterior gleaming in the sunlight. Behind the wheel sat Patricia Wilson, wife of Riverdale's mayor Robert Wilson. She wore oversized designer sunglasses that covered half her face and a silk scarf wrapped loosely around her neck despite the warm weather. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently on the steering wheel as she scanned the crowded parking lot. Ridiculous, she muttered to herself, glancing at her diamond-encrusted watch. I don't have time for this nonsense. Patricia had a lunch reservation at the upscale restaurant inside the mall in 15 minutes, where she was meeting 3 other women from her country club. Being late was not an option, not when she had specifically organized this lunch to show off the exclusive handbag her husband had bought her during their recent trip to Europe. After circling the parking lot twice, Patricia's patience wore thin. Her eyes locked onto an empty handicap parking space near the mall's main entrance. She hesitated for only a moment before making her decision. Just this once, she whispered to herself as she smoothly guided her luxury SUV into the blue-marked space. I'll only be an hour tops. As she turned off the engine, Patricia caught her reflection in the rearview mirror and adjusted a strand of her highlighted blonde hair. She didn't bother looking for the handicap placard she didn't possess. In her mind, being the mayor's wife came with certain unspoken privileges, and surely parking was among the most minor of them. Patricia grabbed her designer purse from the passenger seat and stepped out of her vehicle. Her high heels clicked against the pavement as she activated her car alarm with a casual press of her key fob. The chirp echoed through the parking lot, drawing the attention of an elderly couple who were slowly making their way toward the entrance, the husband leaning heavily on a cane. The old man paused, his eyes moving from Patricia to her car and then to the prominent blue handicap sign posted in front of her parking space. His wife tugged gently at his arm, whispering something that made him shake his head but continue walking. Patricia pretended not to notice their disapproving glances. She walked with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her adult life. Her chin tilted slightly upward, her posture perfect from years of tennis and Pilates. As she approached the mall entrance, a middle-aged man in a faded blue baseball cap and work clothes stepped slightly into her path. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice respectful but firm. "I couldn't help but notice you parked in a handicap spot." He gestured toward the blue space where her Range Rover sat. "Do you have a permit for that?" Patricia stopped, momentarily caught off guard by the stranger's boldness. People in Riverdale typically knew better than to question her. After all, her husband had been mayor for 6 years and the Wilson family had lived in the town for generations. "I'm sorry," she said, though her tone made it clear she wasn't sorry at all. "The handicap spot," the man repeated, seemingly unfazed by her icy stare. "Those spaces are reserved for people who need them. My brother uses a wheelchair and finding accessible parking can be really tough when—" "Do you know who I am?" Patricia interrupted, her voice rising slightly. She removed her sunglasses to look directly at him, as if revealing her face would suddenly make him recognize her importance. The man seemed confused by her question. "No, ma'am, I don't believe we've met." "I'm Patricia Wilson," she said, pausing for effect. When no flash of recognition crossed his face, she added with unmistakable condescension, "The mayor's wife." The man's expression shifted, but not in the way Patricia expected. Instead of apologizing or backing away, he simply nodded. "That's nice," he said mildly. "But the law applies to everyone, Mrs. Wilson. Those spots are there for people with disabilities who need close access." Patricia felt heat rising to her cheeks. She wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like they shopped at discount stores. "Look," she said, glancing at her watch again. "I'm running late for an important meeting. I'll only be an hour. It's not like I'm taking the spot all day." "But someone who needs it might come by while you're gone," the man persisted. "My brother sometimes has to leave and come back later if there are no accessible spots available." Patricia's patience snapped. "Well, your brother isn't here right now, is he?" "The spot was empty and I took it. I pay more in property taxes than most people in this town make in a year. Those taxes fund these parking lots and everything else in this mall area." 2 women walking by slowed their pace, clearly listening to the escalating conversation. Patricia noticed them and straightened her designer jacket, suddenly aware that she was creating a scene. "Now if you'll excuse me," she said coldly to the man. "I have somewhere to be." She brushed past him without waiting for a response, her heartbeat quickening with indignation. Who did that man think he was, questioning her like that? In public, no less. She made a mental note to mention this incident to Robert. Perhaps the police should increase their patrols around the mall if the kind of people who would harass a mayor's wife were hanging around. As she entered the cool interior of the mall, Patricia tried to compose herself. She couldn't arrive at lunch flustered. Appearances were everything in her social circle. She took a deep breath and focused on the pleasant thought of showing off her new handbag to her friends. The mall was busy, with shoppers bustling between stores and the food court filled with lunchtime crowds. Patricia walked briskly, nodding curtly at those who seemed to recognize her. Being the mayor's wife meant she was something of a local celebrity, though she often complained to Robert that Riverdale residents didn't show her the proper respect. As she approached the restaurant, Patricia spotted her friends already seated at their usual table near the window. She checked her reflection one last time in a store window, adjusted her scarf, and put on her practiced social smile. "Ladies, sorry I'm a few minutes late," she announced as she reached their table. "The parking situation here is absolutely dreadful. They really should have reserved spots for public officials and their families." Her friends nodded sympathetically as Patricia settled into her chair, placing her prized handbag prominently on the table. "That's not a bad idea," said Vivian, the bank president's wife. "Richard could probably bring that up at the next business association meeting." "Robert has mentioned it before," Patricia said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But you know how these things go. So much red tape just to get simple things done." She didn't mention that her husband had actually laughed at the suggestion when she'd brought it up over dinner months ago as they ordered their usual salads and sparkling water. Patricia gradually relaxed, pushing the parking incident to the back of her mind. Here among her peers, her status was unquestioned. The conversation flowed from fashion to fundraisers, from neighborhood gossip to their children's accomplishments. What Patricia didn't know was that as she sat enjoying her lunch, Officer Anthony Washington was outside in the parking lot, writing a ticket for the illegally parked white Range Rover. The elderly couple had reported the violation to mall security, who had called it in to the police department as per their standard procedure. Officer Washington, a 12-year veteran of the Riverdale Police Department, carefully documented the violation with his body camera and took photos of the vehicle from multiple angles, following protocol to the letter. As an African-American officer in a predominantly white town, he had learned long ago to be meticulous in his work. He tucked the ticket securely under the windshield wiper and continued his patrol, unaware that his simple act of enforcing the law was about to spark a confrontation that would shake the town of Riverdale to its core. Patricia's lunch with her friends stretched longer than she had planned. Between showing off her new handbag, discussing the upcoming charity gala, and sharing the latest town gossip, nearly 2 hours had passed. She was in high spirits as she finally bid farewell to her companions, having thoroughly enjoyed being the center of attention. "Ladies, this was lovely," she said, rising from her chair. "Same time next week? I'll have so much to tell you about the governor's dinner." She dropped this last bit casually, though she had been working it into the conversation all afternoon. The dinner was still 3 weeks away, but Patricia never missed a chance to remind everyone of her husband's important connections. As she strolled through the mall toward the exit, Patricia window shopped, pausing occasionally to examine displays of jewelry or clothing. She was in no hurry now. Lunch had been a success, and Robert wouldn't be home until late. She had the whole afternoon to herself. Outside, the spring day had grown warmer, and Patricia put her sunglasses back on as she stepped into the sunlight. She fumbled in her purse for her car keys, her mind already on what she might watch on television when she got home, when she spotted something that made her stop in her tracks. A tall black police officer was standing beside her Range Rover, writing something in a small notebook. Even from a distance, Patricia could see the bright orange parking ticket tucked under her windshield wiper. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp as she quickened her pace. "What do you think you're doing?" Officer Anthony Washington looked up calmly as she approached. He had been on the force for 12 years and had dealt with all types of people in that time. He recognized the indignation in her voice immediately. It was the tone of someone unused to being held accountable. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said professionally. "I've issued a citation for parking in a handicapped space without displaying the proper permit." Patricia's face flushed with anger. "Do you know whose car this is?" Officer Washington glanced at the vehicle registration information he had already run. According to records, this vehicle is registered to Robert and Patricia Wilson. His voice remained even, his expression neutral. "That's right. I'm Patricia Wilson," she said, as if this information should immediately change the situation. "My husband is Mayor Robert Wilson." The officer nodded politely. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Wilson. I understand who you are, but I'm afraid that doesn't change the parking violation." Patricia stared at him in disbelief. She had expected him to apologize immediately, maybe even tear up the ticket. That's what usually happened when she mentioned Robert's name around town. "Are you serious right now?" she asked, her voice rising. "You're actually giving me a ticket?" "Yes, ma'am. Parking in a designated handicapped space without a permit is a violation of Municipal Code Section 14-2B. The fine is $250. Patricia's eyes widened at the amount. $250? That's ridiculous. I was only in there for lunch. The duration doesn't matter, Mrs. Wilson. These spaces are reserved for those with disabilities who need closer access to the building. Officer Washington's tone remained professional, but there was a firmness to it that made it clear he wasn't going to back down. People walking by had begun to slow down, some pretending to look at their phones while obviously watching the confrontation. Patricia noticed them and became even more agitated, knowing that word of this would spread quickly through Riverdale's gossip network. "Look, officer." She squinted to read his name tag. "Washington. I think we can resolve this without all this bureaucratic nonsense." She lowered her voice and leaned in slightly. "I'm sure you know how things work in this town. My husband approves the police department's budget." Officer Washington's expression didn't change, but he took a small step back, maintaining a professional distance. "Mrs. Wilson, are you suggesting that I overlook a legal violation because of who your husband is?" "I'm suggesting you use some common sense." Patricia snapped, her patience evaporating. "Do you really want to make an enemy of the mayor over a parking spot? Is that wise for your career?" A middle-aged woman pushing a shopping cart slowed down nearby, now openly watching the exchange. Patricia shot her an angry glare, and the woman hurriedly moved on, but not before pulling out her phone. Officer Washington calmly touched the small camera attached to his uniform. "Mrs. Wilson, I should inform you that this interaction is being recorded on my body camera, as is department policy for all citizen encounters." Patricia felt a jolt of alarm at this information, but quickly recovered. "I don't care if you're recording. Call Robert if you want. He'll tell you how absurd this is." "You're welcome to contest the citation in court," Officer Washington replied. "The information on how to do so is printed on the back of the ticket. I'm not going to court. You're going to take that ticket back right now." Patricia's voice had risen again, and more shoppers were slowing down to watch. A young man had his phone out now, pointed in their direction. Officer Washington noted the growing audience but kept his focus on Patricia. "Mrs. Wilson, I understand you're upset, but I need to ask you to lower your voice and speak respectfully. I'm simply doing my job enforcing the law, which applies equally to everyone in Riverdale." Something about his calm demeanor and the phrase, "applies equally to everyone," pushed Patricia over the edge. "Oh, I bet you're enjoying this, aren't you?" she said, her voice taking on an ugly tone. "Finding any excuse to target people like me?" Officer Washington's expression remained professional, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean by people like you, Mrs. Wilson." "You know exactly what I mean," she said, crossing her arms. "Important people. People who matter in this town." Her emphasis on these words carried a weight that made several onlookers exchange uncomfortable glances. "Everyone matters in Riverdale, Mrs. Wilson," Officer Washington replied evenly. "And everyone is expected to follow the same laws." Patricia gave a dismissive laugh. "Right, I'm sure you enforce everything completely fairly. No hidden agendas at all." Her sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. Officer Washington took a deep breath. In his 12 years on the force, he had encountered this type of thinly veiled insinuation before. He knew exactly what Patricia was implying, but he wasn't going to let her provoke him into saying or doing anything unprofessional. "Mrs. Wilson, Is there anything else I can help you with today regarding this citation? If not, I need to continue my patrol. His voice remained steady, but there was a slight tightness around his eyes now, the only sign that her words had affected him. You can help by tearing up that ticket, Patricia said coldly, or I'll be having a very interesting conversation with my husband tonight about how his police force is treating taxpayers. As I mentioned, you have the right to contest the citation if you believe it was issued in error. Officer Washington gestured toward the blue handicapped parking sign, clearly posted in front of her vehicle. However, the photographic evidence in my report will confirm that your vehicle was parked in a designated handicapped space, without displaying the required permit. Patricia fumbled in her purse and pulled out her wallet. Fine, how much did you say it was? I'll pay it right now if that will end this ridiculous situation. She pulled out several crisp $100 bills. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. Mrs. Wilson, the citation includes instructions for payment. You'll need to follow those procedures. Officer Washington pointed to the information on the ticket. Patricia snatched the ticket from under her windshield wiper and crumpled it in her hand. This is harassment, she declared loudly, looking around at the gathered onlookers as if seeking support. You're all witnesses. Most people quickly averted their eyes, uncomfortable with being drawn into the confrontation. But the young man with the phone kept recording, and the elderly couple from earlier had returned and were watching with obvious disapproval directed at Patricia. Mrs. Wilson, destroying the citation doesn't void it, Officer Washington explained patiently. A copy has already been entered into the system. You'll still need to resolve it through proper channels. Patricia's face contorted with fury. She stepped closer to Officer Washington, her finger pointed at his face. Listen to me. I don't know who you think you are, but when Robert hears about this, step back, please, Officer Washington said firmly, raising his hand slightly. I need you to maintain a respectful distance. Or what? You'll arrest me for standing near you now? Patricia's voice had taken on a shrill quality. Is that how your kind handles these situations? A collective gasp rose from the small crowd that had gathered. The racial undertone in her question was unmistakable. Officer Washington's expression remained professional, but he reached for his radio. Dispatch, this is Officer Washington. I'm at the Westview Mall parking lot and may need assistance with an uncooperative individual regarding a parking citation. The radio crackled in response. Copy that, Officer Washington. Officer Chen is in the vicinity and can be there in approximately 2 minutes. Patricia's eyes widened at the realization that another officer was being called to the scene. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face as she began to understand that the situation was spiraling beyond her control. Patricia stared at Officer Washington's radio in disbelief. The reality of her situation was slowly sinking in. This wasn't going to disappear with a wave of her hand or the mention of her husband's name. She glanced around at the growing crowd of onlookers, many with phones raised, and felt a wave of panic. You're making a scene, she hissed at Officer Washington, lowering her voice. Is that what you want? To embarrass the mayor's wife in public? I'm simply responding to a parking violation, Mrs. Wilson, Officer Washington replied evenly. Any scene being made isn't of my creation. Patricia's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to being spoken to this way, especially not by someone she considered beneath her social standing. In her mind, the proper response to her status was deference and special treatment, not this stubborn insistence on following rules. Let me explain something to you, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Do you know how many fundraisers I organize for this town? How many hours I volunteer? My husband and I have done more for Riverdale than you could possibly understand. Officer Washington nodded politely. Community service is commendable, Mrs. Wilson. However, nothing. Patricia cut him off. You think because you have a badge and a gun, you can treat me like I'm nobody? I host dinners for your police chief at my home. Chief Bennett and Robert are golf buddies. One phone call from me, and you'll be directing traffic at the high school for the rest of your career. The crowd had grown to about 15 people now, a mix of shoppers and mall employees on their breaks. The young man recording with his phone had moved closer, trying to capture every word. Mrs. Wilson, Officer Washington said, his voice still measured but firmer now. Threatening an officer with professional consequences for doing his job could be considered intimidation of a public servant. I strongly advise you to calm down and handle this through proper channels. Patricia laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Intimidation? I'm a 52-year-old woman talking to a police officer with a gun. Who exactly is intimidating whom? Officer Washington didn't take the bait. Instead, he took out his notebook again and began writing additional notes. His calmness only seemed to infuriate Patricia further. What are you writing now? She demanded. More lies about me? I'm documenting our interaction, he replied without looking up. Standard procedure? Patricia stepped closer, trying to see what he was writing. You'd better not be twisting my words. I know how this works. You people always stick together. Officer Washington looked up sharply at that comment. You people? He repeated, his tone still professional but with a subtle edge that hadn't been there before. Patricia realized she had crossed a line that even she recognized was dangerous territory. She backpedaled quickly. Police officers. You police officers always stick together. But the damage was done. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder and Patricia could hear snippets of their comments. Did she really just say that? Someone's recording this, right? Wait till this hits social media. A slender Asian American officer approached from the other side of the parking lot. She walked with purpose, her eyes taking in the situation as she drew near. Officer Washington, she said with a nod. Dispatch said you requested assistance? Officer Chen, he acknowledged. Mrs. Wilson here is upset about receiving a citation for illegally parking in a handicapped space. Officer Lisa Chen glanced at the Range Rover, noting its position in the clearly marked handicapped spot, then turned to Patricia. Good afternoon, Mrs. Wilson. I'm Officer Chen. How can we resolve this situation? Patricia felt a surge of hope at the arrival of the new officer. Maybe this woman would be more reasonable, more understanding of her position in the community. Officer Chen, I'm glad you're here, Patricia said, forcing her voice to sound calmer. I was just explaining to Officer Washington that there's been a misunderstanding. I only parked here briefly for lunch and now he's making this huge deal out of nothing. Officer Chen's expression remained neutral. I understand your frustration, but parking in a designated handicapped space without a permit is a violation regardless of the duration. These spaces are specifically reserved for those who need them. Patricia's momentary hope deflated. So you're taking his side? Just like that? This isn't about sides, Mrs. Wilson, Officer Chen replied. It's about enforcing the law equally for everyone. That phrase again, equally for everyone, grated on Patricia's ears. In her mind, the world didn't work that way. There were different rules for different people. There always had been. I want to speak to Chief Bennett, Patricia demanded, pulling out her cell phone. Right now. You're welcome to call whoever you'd like, Officer Washington said. But it won't change the fact that you received a valid citation for a clear violation. As Patricia fumbled with her phone, she noticed the elderly couple from earlier watching the scene unfold. The husband, leaning heavily on his cane, wore a handicapped placard around his neck, the very permit she should have had to park in the space she'd taken. Something about their quiet disapproval made her even angrier. She pointed at them accusingly. Are they the ones who reported me? Did they call you to come harass me over nothing? Officer Washington didn't follow her gesture. The source of the complaint is irrelevant, Mrs. Wilson. The violation was observed and documented. Patricia's hands shook as she tried to find Chief Bennett's number in her contacts. This is because I'm the mayor's wife, isn't it? You're trying to make some kind of point. Officer Chen exchanged a glance with Officer Washington, their experienced eyes communicating volumes. They had both dealt with people like Patricia before, people who believed their status put them above the law and who couldn't conceive that they were being treated just like anyone else would be. Mrs. Wilson, Officer Chen said gently, this is about a parking violation, nothing more. The citation is $250. You can pay it online or by mail using the instructions on the ticket. Or I can fight it in court, Patricia said, finally finding the chief's number. And believe me, I will. As she pressed the call button, Officer Washington noticed her hands were still shaking. Despite her bravado, Patricia was clearly rattled by the confrontation and the growing audience. That's absolutely your right, he assured her. The court date information is also on the citation. Chief Bennett's phone went straight to voicemail. Patricia's face fell, but she quickly composed herself and left a terse message. Richard, it's Patricia Wilson. Call me immediately. There's a situation at the Westview Mall involving two of your officers. It's urgent, she hung up and glared at the officers. He'll call back any minute. Then we'll see about this ticket. Officer Chen nodded politely. In the meantime, Mrs. Wilson, we need to ask you to move your vehicle from the handicapped space. You're continuing to be in violation as we speak. This practical reminder seemed to throw Patricia off balance. Fine, she snapped, digging in her purse for her car keys. I'll move it. Are you happy now? Thank you for your cooperation, Officer Washington said, his tone sincere despite everything that had transpired. As Patricia opened her car door, her anger boiled over once more. You know, Officer Washington, I've always supported the police. Always. My husband has fought for your department's funding when others wanted to cut it. But this makes me reconsider that position. Officer Washington met her gaze steadily. I appreciate your support of law enforcement, Mrs. Wilson. That's why I believe you understand that no one, regardless of their position or connections, should be above the law. That's what makes our justice system work. Something in his calm, measured response made Patricia even angrier. She had expected him to be intimidated by her threat about police funding, not to turn it around as a lesson in civic responsibility. Don't lecture me about justice, she said coldly. You have no idea the circles I move in or the power I have in this town. Officer Chen stepped forward slightly. Mrs. Wilson, we understand you're upset, but continued threats could escalate this situation unnecessarily. I suggest you take some time to calm down before driving. Patricia turned her glare to Officer Chen. I don't need advice from you either. I'm perfectly calm. Even as she said it, she could hear the tremor in her own voice. The young man who had been recording moved even closer, his phone still raised. Patricia suddenly noticed him and pointed angrily. And you? What do you think you're doing? Recording in public is legal, ma'am, the young man said, not lowering his device. It's my right, not when you're harassing me. Patricia lunged toward him, reaching for his phone. Officer Washington moved quickly, stepping between them. Mrs. Wilson, do not touch his property or interfere with his legal right to record in public. Patricia pulled back, suddenly aware that she had almost made physical contact, a line that would have dramatically changed the nature of this encounter. He's invading my privacy, she insisted, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice now. You're in a public place, Officer Chen explained. There's no expectation of privacy here. Patricia looked from one officer to the other, then at the crowd that had continued to grow around them. She saw judgment in their eyes, heard the whispers, noticed the phones recording. The control she thought she had over this situation, over her image in the community, was slipping away with every passing second. This isn't over, she said, her voice quieter but no less intense. Not by a long shot. She climbed into her Range Rover and slammed the door. Through the window, Officer Washington could see her hands shaking as she put the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life and Patricia backed out of the handicapped space with more speed than was safe in a crowded parking lot. As she drove away, the elderly couple slowly made their way to the now vacant handicapped space. The husband nodded gratefully to the officers as his wife helped him toward the mall entrance. Patricia's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white as she drove away from the mall. Her mind raced, replaying the confrontation over and over. How dare those officers treat her that way? In front of everyone. The humiliation burned in her chest like fire. She grabbed her phone at a stoplight and tried Chief Bennett again. This time he picked up on the third ring. Richard, it's Patricia Wilson. Yes, Patricia, I got your message. What's going on? The police chief's voice sounded cautious. One of your officers just harassed me at the Westview Mall. A parking ticket of all things. When I tried to explain who I was, he called for backup like I was some kind of criminal. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Which officer? Washington, Patricia spat the name. And then some woman officer showed up, Chen, I think. Another pause. Anthony Washington and Lisa Chen? They're two of my best officers. Patricia felt betrayed by his neutral tone. Well, your best officers just publicly humiliated the mayor's wife. Washington was completely out of line, Richard. He refused to listen to reason and treated me like I was nobody. What exactly happened, Patricia? Chief Bennett's voice remained measured. I parked in a handicapped spot for barely an hour while I had lunch. Nobody was using it. And when I came out, this Officer Washington was writing me a ticket. When I explained who I was, he completely ignored it and called for backup when I tried to reason with him. The chief cleared his throat. Were you parked in a handicapped space without a permit? Patricia was stunned by the question. That's not the point, Richard. Actually, that is precisely the point. If you were parked illegally, I can't believe you're taking his side. Patricia cut him off, her voice rising again. I'm not taking sides, Patricia. I'm trying to understand the situation. Did anything else happen? Patricia hesitated. She was angry enough to complain about Officer Washington's attitude, but something held her back from repeating her exact words. Deep down, she knew some of what she'd said could sound bad if quoted directly. He was disrespectful, she said finally, and people were filming it. It's going to be all over social media, Richard. How do you think that makes Robert look? The mayor's wife being treated like a common criminal? Chief Bennett sighed. I'll review Officer Washington's body camera footage and speak with both officers. But Patricia, if you were parked illegally, just talk to Robert, she interrupted again, ending the call abruptly. The rest of her drive home passed in a blur of anger and indignation. By the time she pulled into the driveway of their large colonial-style house, Patricia had convinced herself she was the victim of a deliberate setup. Why else would Officer Washington have been so inflexible, so unwilling to extend the professional courtesy that should come with her position? Inside, she poured herself a glass of white wine even though it was barely 3 p.m. She needed to calm her nerves before Robert got home. As she sat at their granite kitchen island, Patricia opened her social media accounts on her tablet. Nothing yet about the incident, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Her phone rang again. Vivian, one of the women from lunch. Patricia, are you okay? Susan just called me. She was coming into the mall as you were leaving and said there was some kind of situation with the police. Patricia felt a fresh wave of humiliation. So it had already started, the gossip, the whispers. It was nothing, she lied. Just a misunderstanding about parking. You know how it is. Susan said there was a crowd and people were filming. She said you looked upset. Well, wouldn't you be upset if some officer decided to target you over nothing? Patricia snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. Vivian was her ally after all. Of course, Vivian soothed. It's outrageous. Was it that new officer? The one they just hired from the city? Patricia recognized the opening Vivian was giving her. A chance to blame this on someone from outside their community. Someone different. The temptation to say yes was strong. No, she said finally. It was Officer Washington. Oh. The single syllable carried volumes of meaning. Anthony Washington might not have been born in Riverdale, but he had served on their police force for 12 years. He coached Little League. His daughter had babysat for half the families in town. He was respected. Well, Vivian continued awkwardly, I'm sure it will all blow over. Nobody would dare make a big deal out of this knowing who you are. But even as Vivian said the words, Patricia could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Times were changing, even in Riverdale. Camera phones and social media had created a new kind of accountability that didn't care about local social hierarchies. After hanging up, Patricia poured a second glass of wine and tried to distract herself with television. But her mind kept returning to the confrontation. She replayed her words, wincing at some of them. Had she really said, you people? Had she really lunged at that young man's phone? By the time she heard Robert's key in the front door at 6:30 p.m., Patricia had worked herself into a state of anxious indignation again. She met him in the foyer, words spilling out before he could even put down his briefcase. Robert, you won't believe what happened today. That Officer Washington gave me a parking ticket at the mall and refused to listen when I told him who I was. He called for backup, Robert. Backup, as if I was dangerous. Mayor Robert Wilson, a tall man with graying hair and the practiced smile of a career politician, set down his briefcase slowly. Slow down, Patty. What exactly happened? She gave him her version of events, strategically omitting certain phrases and emphasizing Washington's disrespect. As she spoke, Robert's expression grew increasingly concerned, but not in the way she had hoped. Wait, you parked in a handicapped space? He interrupted. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. Just for lunch. It was empty, Robert. That's not how it works, Patricia. Those spaces are reserved. I know that. She cut him off. But you're missing the point. He treated me like I was nobody. Like being the mayor's wife meant nothing. Robert rubbed his forehead. Being the mayor's wife doesn't put you above the law, Patty. Patricia stared at him, stunned by his response. Whose side are you on? This isn't about sides, Robert said, loosening his tie. It's about… That's exactly what they said, Patricia exclaimed. This isn't about sides, like they rehearsed it. Robert pulled out his phone. I've got 3 missed calls from Richard Bennett. I'm guessing this is why. Good, Patricia said. You need to talk to him about how his officers are treating your family. Robert gave her a long look. Let me hear what Richard has to say first. Patricia followed him into his home office, hovering anxiously as he called the police chief. She could only hear Robert's side of the conversation, but it was enough to make her stomach sink. Yes, Richard, I see. Body camera footage. She said what? Oh, God. How many people were filming? Already? Yes, send me the link. I understand. Oh, you did the right thing calling me. Yes, I'll handle it from here, Robert hung up and turned to Patricia with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of anger and profound disappointment. Richard said Officer Washington's body camera recorded the entire interaction. He's reviewed the footage. Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. Patricia, did you tell Officer Washington that his kind always stick together? Did you use the phrase, you people? Patricia felt the blood drain from her face. I didn't mean it that way. How exactly did you mean it then? Robert demanded. I was upset. He was being so rigid, so… By the book. He was doing his job, Robert said, his voice rising. His job, Patricia. Enforcing the laws that I, as mayor, am sworn to uphold. But no buts. Do you have any idea the position you've put me in? The damage you've done? Robert turned his tablet toward her. It's already on Twitter. Someone posted a video 20 minutes ago. They're calling you Riverdale Karen. Patricia grabbed the tablet with shaking hands. The video showed her from the moment she approached Officer Washington, captured her increasingly agitated behavior, her thinly veiled racist comments, and her lunge toward the young man's phone. The caption read, Mayor's wife goes full Karen when called out for illegal parking. Wait for the racist comments. The post already had hundreds of retweets and comments, most of them expressing outrage at her behavior. There were calls for Robert to make a statement, for her to apologize, even for Robert to resign if he didn't denounce her actions. Patricia set down the tablet, feeling sick. I didn't mean it like that. Robert looked at her, his political mind already calculating the damage control needed. Intention doesn't matter anymore, Patty. Not with something like this. It's what it looks like, what it sounds like. So what do we do? She asked in a small voice. Robert's phone buzzed with incoming messages. His chief of staff, the city communications director, council members. The story was spreading like wildfire. I have to make a statement, he said, already typing on his phone. Tonight, before this gets any worse. What kind of statement? Patricia asked warily. Robert looked at her directly, his expression grim. One that makes it absolutely clear that those views do not represent me, my office, or our administration. One that apologizes to Officer Washington and the entire community. Patricia felt her world tilting beneath her feet. You're going to publicly side against me? Your own wife? This isn't about sides, Robert said for the 3rd time that day. It's about doing what's right, what's necessary. He paused, then added more gently, and, Patricia, you're going to need to make a public apology too. Me? Apologize to him? The very thought was inconceivable to her just hours ago. But now, seeing her behavior through others' eyes, watching the video of herself acting in ways she barely recognized, Robert nodded firmly. Yes, a sincere apology. And you're going to pay that ticket. Outside their home, neither of them noticed the news van that had just pulled up to the curb. The doorbell rang, cutting through the tense silence between Patricia and Robert. They exchanged alarmed glances. Are you expecting someone? Robert asked, already knowing the answer. Patricia shook her head, a sense of dread washing over her. Robert moved to the window and peeked through the curtains. It's Channel 5 News, he said, his voice tight. There's a reporter and a cameraman. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Already? How did they… Social media, Robert said grimly. That video is spreading faster than we thought. He straightened his tie and smoothed his hair. I'll handle this. What are you going to say? Patricia asked, suddenly terrified of what might come out of her husband's mouth. Robert looked at her, his expression a mixture of disappointment and determination. The truth, Patricia, that you made a mistake, that your comments were inappropriate and that they don't reflect the values of my administration or our family. But, no buts, he said firmly. Stay here. Please don't make this worse. Patricia stood frozen in the hallway as Robert opened the front door, instantly transforming into the polished politician she had married 15 years ago. His practiced smile appeared, though it didn't reach his eyes. Good evening, Diane, he greeted the reporter by name. I was about to call a press conference, but you've saved me the trouble. The reporter, a woman in her 40s with a sleek bob, looked surprised at his candor. Mayor Wilson, we're here about a video that's circulating online involving your wife in a confrontation with police officers at Westview Mall today. Yes. I'm aware of the incident, Robert said, his voice steady. Would you like to come in? I'm prepared to make a statement. Patricia felt a wave of panic as Robert invited the news crew into their living room. She backed away, retreating to the kitchen. But she could still hear everything. Mayor Wilson, the reporter began once the camera was rolling. A video posted online shows your wife, Patricia Wilson, in what appears to be a heated exchange with Officer Anthony Washington after receiving a parking citation. In the video, she makes several comments that many viewers are characterizing as racially insensitive. Can you address this situation? Robert nodded gravely. First, let me be absolutely clear. The comments made by my wife in that video do not reflect my personal views, the values of my administration, or the principles that guide our community in Riverdale. I believe in equal treatment under the law for all citizens, regardless of their position, connections, or background. Patricia winced at his words, each one feeling like a public repudiation. So you're condemning your wife's actions? The reporter pressed. I'm acknowledging that a mistake was made, Robert said carefully. Patricia parked illegally in a handicapped space, and when confronted with that violation, she responded inappropriately. Officer Washington was simply doing his job, enforcing our laws fairly as all our officers are instructed to do. And the racial undertones in some of her comments? Robert took a deep breath. Those were unacceptable, full stop. Officer Washington is a respected 12-year veteran of our police force who has served this community with distinction. He deserves better, and so do all the citizens of Riverdale. From her hiding place in the kitchen, Patricia felt tears welling in her eyes, not just from the humiliation, but from hearing her husband so clearly distance himself from her actions. It was as if he was seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time, and he didn't like what he saw. Will there be any consequences for this incident? The reporter asked. Patricia will be paying the citation in full, Robert said. But more importantly, she'll be issuing a public apology to Officer Washington, Officer Chen, and the entire community. Additionally, I've decided that she will be volunteering weekly at the Riverdale Community Center's Disability Support Program for the next 6 months to better understand why those parking spaces are so crucial for people who truly need them. Patricia nearly dropped her wine glass. He hadn't discussed any of this with her. Volunteering? For 6 months? With strangers? And I will be meeting personally with Officer Washington tomorrow to apologize for any distress this incident has caused him. Robert continued. Our police officers deserve our respect, especially when they're upholding the law fairly and professionally as he did today. The reporter looked surprised at the comprehensive response. That's quite a detailed plan, Mayor. Was this your idea or Mrs. Wilson's? Patricia held her breath, waiting for Robert's answer. These are steps we both agree are necessary, Robert said after a slight pause. Patricia recognizes the seriousness of her actions today. She's not hiding from this mistake. In fact, she'd like to speak to you directly. Patricia froze. No, he couldn't be serious. She wasn't prepared. She looked terrible. She hadn't rehearsed what to say, but Robert was already walking toward the kitchen, his expression making it clear this wasn't optional. Patricia? Diane from Channel 5 would like a word. Patricia took a deep breath, set down her wine glass, and tried to compose herself. She had 2 choices, refuse and look even worse, or face the music. With shaking hands, she smoothed her hair and walked into the living room. The bright camera light hit her as she entered, and she fought the urge to turn and run. Instead, she sat on the sofa beside Robert, who took her hand in what would look like a supportive gesture to viewers but felt more like a restraint. Mrs. Wilson, the reporter began, would you like to address the video that's circulating online? Patricia looked at the camera, then away, then at Robert, who nodded encouragingly. She had spent years crafting her image as the perfect mayor's wife, poised, superior, untouchable. Now that image was shattered and she had no script for this moment. She began, her voice catching. She cleared her throat and started again. I made a terrible mistake today. I parked where I shouldn't have, and when Officer Washington rightfully called me on it, I behaved badly. The words felt strange in her mouth, an admission of wrongdoing, something she had avoided her entire adult life. Some of the things I said were, she paused, searching for the right word, hurtful, disrespectful, wrong. Officer Washington was just doing his job, enforcing the law as he should. My position as the mayor's wife doesn't place me above those laws. Robert squeezed her hand, encouraging her to continue. I want to apologize to Officer Washington and Officer Chen for my behavior. They were professional even when I wasn't. Patricia felt tears threatening again but pushed through. And I want to apologize to the community of Riverdale. You deserve better from your mayor's wife. The reporter studied her face, looking for signs of sincerity. The video shows you using phrases like you people and your kind. Many viewers interpreted those as having racial undertones. Would you like to address that specifically? Patricia felt a flash of her old defensiveness, the urge to explain away her words as being misinterpreted. But Robert's hand tightened on hers, and somewhere deep inside she knew this was a moment of truth. Those words were wrong, she admitted quietly. They came from a place of privilege and entitlement that I've never really examined in myself. I can't take them back, but I can promise to do better. I'll be working with the Disability Support Program, as my husband mentioned, and she glanced at Robert, then made a decision of her own. I'd also like to meet with the town's Diversity Council to educate myself better. The surprise on Robert's face was evident, but he quickly masked it with an approving nod. The interview continued for a few more minutes, with Patricia answering questions as honestly as she could manage. When the camera finally turned off and the news crew left, she collapsed back onto the sofa, emotionally exhausted. That was good, Patty, Robert said, his voice gentler now. It was a start. Will it be enough? She asked, suddenly looking vulnerable in a way Robert hadn't seen in years. I don't know, he answered honestly, but it's the right thing to do regardless of whether it fixes everything. Patricia nodded slowly. I keep thinking about that elderly couple at the mall, the ones who needed that parking space. I took something that wasn't mine because I thought I deserved special treatment. Robert didn't disagree, which perhaps hurt most of all. I've been like that for a long time, haven't I? She asked, not really needing an answer. Robert sat beside her again. We've all been complicit in it, Patty. Me, your friends, this town. When you're in a position of privilege, it's easy to start believing you're entitled to it. Patricia's phone buzzed with incoming messages, some supportive from close friends, others expressing disappointment, and a few from people she thought were friends, but who were now clearly distancing themselves. The social consequences were already beginning. What happens tomorrow? She asked. I meet with Officer Washington at 9 a.m., Robert said. I'd like you to come with me. The thought made Patricia's stomach churn with anxiety, but she nodded. Okay. Then we start the work of rebuilding trust, with the community, with the police department, with each other. Patricia looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw the strain these past hours had put on him. His political career, which they had both worked so hard to build, was at risk because of her actions. I'm sorry, Robert, for all of this. I know, he said simply. As the evening wore on, Patricia sat alone in their living room, scrolling through the comments online. Among the angry and disappointed messages, she found a few that gave her hope. People who appreciated her apology, who believed in second chances, who suggested resources for learning and growth. One comment in particular caught her eye. From a local teacher, real change starts with recognizing our mistakes. I hope Mrs. Wilson takes this opportunity not just to apologize, but to become a better person and community member. Patricia read it several times, letting the words sink in. For years she had measured her worth by her social status, by the power she wielded as the mayor's wife. Now all of that was threatened, and she was facing a different kind of challenge. Not how to maintain her position at the top of Riverdale's social hierarchy, but how to become someone worthy of respect for her actions rather than her title. It would be hard work. Humbling work. And for the first time in her life, Patricia Wilson wasn't sure if she was up to the task. But as she closed her laptop and looked out at the quiet street where reporters had stood just hours before, she made a silent promise to try. Because while the parking ticket had cost her $250, the real price of her actions that day had been much higher, and the lesson it taught her was more valuable than she could have imagined.